They burned the check. But what scorched me was how cold they were. The fire crackled like it had a conscience. It devoured the paper with glee, the embers curling inwards as if tucking away a secret. But it wasn't the flames that seared into me. It was the silence, the way no one flinched, not even blinked. That silence colder than the snow-laden pines outside spread through the Whitmore living room like rot. Walter used to say, "Sometimes fire isn't for warmth, it's to erase." I remembered those words from his last letter, cryptic, handwritten and hidden behind a family photo I hadn't touched in years. Now they rang out like prophecy. December 26th, 2023, the day after the kind of Christmas you never forget. Not for its magic, but because something irrevocable ends. Our family's lawyer, Mr. Hanley, had gathered us all in the drawing room of the Boulder estate. My childhood home. Same grand fireplace, same heavy drapes, same icy air between the people inside. Mother sat tall, unbothered, in a navy silk blouse that reflected the firelight like oil. Ethan lounged on the armrest, one hand twirling a silver pen, the other nursing a glass of something dark and slow. Camille was quiet, tucked beside him like a favored accessory. I stood. They made me stand. Mr. Hanley cleared his throat, gaze pinned to the document in his lap, like it might rearrange itself if he looked too long. Per Walter Whitmore's revised testament dated October 9th of this year, the estate recognizes the following benefactors. He began listing names: Nadine Whitmore, Ethan Whitmore, Camille Jones. Not mine. Then the words, Rachel Whitmore is no longer recognized as a legal heir or citizen under Walter Whitmore's power of attorney dated November 2021, no longer recognized, as if I had vanished, as if my life had been whiteouted by a stroke of legal ink. I stared at Mr. Hanley, waiting for the punchline. None came. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope cream-heavy embossed with Walter's initials. This was left in trust. A check written by Walter to Rachel Whitmore. Issued 5 days before his passing. Amount $38 million. I took a step forward. The paper trembled in his hand. Then Mother stood and plucked it from him like it was lint. She didn't even look at me. She walked to the fireplace, fingers steady, heels clicking across the marble. The check hovered in her hand for a moment. No trembling, no hesitation, and then it disappeared into flame. A hiss, a curl, a brief golden protest, then black. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Ethan chuckled behind me. He left it to a ghost. Ghosts don't cash checks. I turned slow, as if through water. Camille wouldn't meet my eyes. Mr. Hanley began packing up the documents like this was any other Tuesday. No one said anything to me. No confrontation, no apology, no raised voices. Just erasure. One by one, they filed out. My mother first murmuring something about dinner reservations. Ethan followed whispering something in Camille's ear that made her smirk. Mr. Hanley, briefcase in hand, nodded politely as if this were simply unfortunate. I stood alone in the room where I'd once opened birthday gifts, where Walter had taught me to play chess, where I'd cried after scraping my knee on that same hearth. Snow beat softly against the windows, the only sound other than the fire digesting the last trace of my existence. They erased me on paper. I hadn't realized until that moment that they'd done it in real life too. The DMV had no idea who I was. Neither did the hospital where I was born. The woman behind the plexiglass barrier looked up at me with the dull fatigue of someone already counting down to lunch. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, idle and bored, like she already knew what I was going to say. Wouldn't matter. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no record of a Rachel Whitmore born on July 18, 1985 in the state of Colorado, or anywhere else actually. She turned her screen so I could see the blank search result. Nothing. Are you sure you didn't get married recently and change your name? I've never been married. I said too sharply. Try my social security number again. She typed it in with exaggerated slowness. Same result. She tilted her head like I was a puzzle she wasn't paid enough to solve. It says the number's been voided. Could be a clerical error. You could file a ticket with the state. I didn't wait to hear the rest. My hands were shaking. Outside, the sky pressed down on the city like wet concrete. The government building smelled like toner and old coffee and resignation. My boots squeaked against the linoleum as I left the counter clutching the empty manila envelope I'd brought my papers in my driver's license, passport, social security card. All of them now meaningless. At the bank, the teller scanned my ID, then frowned. She tried again. There's an alert on this profile, she said. Actually, the system says this account has been locked due to irregular identity activity. I'll need a manager. 15 minutes later, the manager told me I could submit a written appeal to have my identity reviewed. Reviewed. Like it was a fraudulent claim I was making. Like I'd stolen myself. Next came the insurance line. I held my breath as I dialed. After 30 minutes on hold, a man with a robotic voice told me my policy didn't exist. No active coverage found under this name or social security number, he repeated. Would you like to start a new application? I hung up without answering. At every stop, the result was the same blank stares, error messages, frozen systems. Like my existence had been clipped from the circuitry of modern life. I couldn't drive, couldn't bank, couldn't claim health benefits. According to the institutions of America, I was a ghost. At one point, a clerk behind a glass window looked at me and joked, "If you don't exist, you don't owe taxes." Lucky you. I wanted to scream. But all I did was nod like a polite shadow. The real tipping point came when I walked into the hospital where I was born. Same beige walls, same oversized murals of happy mothers and wrapped newborns. I walked up to the front desk and asked to access my birth record. What's your mother's name? The clerk asked. Nadine Whitmore. Her fingers tapped. We have 2 Whitmores listed that year. Neither match your first name. I was born July 18th, 1985. Not according to our system. My breath caught in my throat. I asked her to try different spellings. Try using just the date. Try cross-referencing with pediatric records. She looked at me with a practiced smile and pity in her eyes. There's no record, she said. You might want to check if you were adopted privately. Or born out of state. I walked to the restroom, stumbled in like I was drunk, and gripped the porcelain sink with both hands. My face stared back at me from the mirror, too sharp, too pale. I touched my cheek just to confirm it was still there. Still me. But the reflection didn't feel like proof. Not when the system said otherwise. Not when every official database looked right past me. The lights overhead buzzed sterile and humming. Somewhere deep in my gut, I felt a wave of nausea rising not from sickness, but from the sheer weight of displacement. I had no tether left, not to paper, not to law, not to memory, because if no record backed, it could memory even be trusted. I thought it was just money they'd taken from me, that they'd burned a check, shredded a legacy. But now I knew better. They didn't just take the money, they took the right for me to be me. It only took one sentence to crack the silence. Camille arrived 10 minutes late, cheeks flushed from the cold breath puffing in uneven clouds. She spotted me through the window and gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. I sat in a booth near the back, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and pretending not to feel like I was waiting for a ghost. The cafe hadn't changed since college. Same scratched-up tabletops. Same copper light fixtures hanging too low. The same chalkboard specials that no one ever ordered from. Outside, the snow drifted lazily through the air, melting the moment it touched the ground. It was the kind of day that made everything feel muffled, like the world had forgotten to turn the volume back up. She slid into the seat across from me. Thanks for the text. I didn't think you'd want to talk. I didn't, I said, until I realized I have no one else to ask. She looked down at her hands. Her fingernails were painted a soft lilac perfectly shaped. The kind of detail I wouldn't have noticed before, but now I saw everything. Every twitch, every hesitation. We sat in silence for a moment. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, then darted away. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "That depends," I replied, "on whether I'm actually a person." Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence between us thickened, stretching taut. Then she said it. "Nadine." She didn't want to take any chances. She was afraid Walter might come back and change the will. The words dropped like glass onto tile. I set my cup down slowly. Come back. From where Camille paled. I mean before he passed. He'd been in and out of the hospital so much. Nadine was paranoid. She thought he'd suddenly get lucid again and undo everything. I tilted my head. Undo what exactly? She fumbled for a smile. You know, his decisions. He was unpredictable toward the end. That was a lie. Walter had always been deliberate, precise. Even dying, he'd left things arranged like a man laying out chess pieces for a final game. If he'd wanted to disinherit me, he wouldn't have waited until the last minute to do it. Then Camille slipped again. "Did you ever see the sketch he made of the studio? He said it was for something sentimental. I shouldn't have brought it up. Never mind." I stared at her. What sketch? Nothing, just he once mentioned reorganizing the space. That's all. My stomach tightened. No one had known about that. Walter died suddenly in the hospital days before Christmas. There hadn't been any time for long conversations, for showing people plans. Not unless... "You saw him before he passed?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not directly. You just knew about a private sketch in a locked studio from a man on his deathbed." Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her cup. "You're reading too much into it." I let her think I was buying it. Smiled just enough to make her drop her guard. We chatted a little longer about weather, holiday crowds, things that didn't matter. Camille softened as we spoke, her relief obvious. She thought the storm had passed. Then she reached for her wallet to pay. A slip of paper fell out when she opened it, a folded square with frayed edges. My eye caught a faint line of graphite before she scooped it up, but not before I saw what was written in the corner. R. Whitmore. My name. His hand. She didn't notice me staring, just tucked it away and murmured something about catching her yoga class. She offered a hug, awkward, insincere, and left the cafe in a rush of perfume and cold air. I sat there long after she'd gone. The snow outside was falling harder now, covering the sidewalk in white silence. I replayed her every word, every pause, every breath. She didn't realize it yet, but she'd just handed me the first thread. I remembered the smell of turpentine. They remembered nothing. The old house on Maple Creek still looked like it had something to say, even though its windows had been boarded and its garden left to rot. My grandmother's house, or what was left of it, stood brittle under the pale winter sun, its shutters trembling in the wind like loose teeth. The property manager didn't ask questions. He handed me the spare key with a tired shrug and a warning about the broken floorboards upstairs. I nodded, feigning indifference, then stepped inside. The air hit me like a memory. Dust, wood, rot, and the faintest ghost of turpentine. I closed the door behind me, letting the silence press in. The walls had been repainted, the furniture removed, but the bones of the place hadn't changed. Every step across the warped floor felt like I was walking back into a part of myself I didn't know I missed. The studio had been in the attic. Walter used to take me up there on Sunday mornings when the world was still quiet and the coffee in his thermos still steaming. "Art needs stillness," he'd say, brushing charcoal across canvas as I copied him with uneven strokes. That attic was sacred. Mine. Until Nadine cleared it out after Grandma died. She'd claimed it was unsafe. claimed the house was too big for sentiment. What she meant was that it was too full of us. Now, as I climbed the attic stairs, I wondered if she'd done more than just empty the room. I wondered if she'd erased me from here, too. The attic was cold and sharp, the kind of cold that burned your teeth. Light filtered through a cracked window, catching particles of dust in golden strands. The wooden beams above me groaned like they remembered every footprint that had ever crossed them. At first, I thought the space was empty. But behind the old wardrobe, a piece too heavy to have been moved, something caught my eye. A hinge. A crawl space. I pried the door open and was met with a musty breath of forgotten air. Inside, under a thin blanket of grime and cobweb, sat a wooden box. Small but heavy. My fingers hesitated, then opened the lid. Inside were the drawings. Dozens of them. Sketches from when I was 10. Lopsided apples, crooked dogs, a sketch of Walter in his favorite reading chair. Each one signed in my child's handwriting, R. Whitmore. I hadn't remembered these, but Walter had. Tucked underneath the drawings was a manila envelope. Inside a letter. Typed. Crisp. Addressed not to Nadine, not to any family member, but to a name I'd never heard before, Joanna Greer. It began, Joanna, I need someone I can trust. Not bound by blood or sentiment, just law. The letter went on to describe assets, accounts, and a separate arrangement in the event of sudden interference. It was signed in Walter's unmistakable scrawl. My breath hitched. Why had he written to a stranger? Why hadn't anyone mentioned this name during the will reading? I read the last line twice. If anything happens that looks too convenient, follow the painting. The painting, I dug deeper into the box, heart pounding. At the very bottom, under the envelope, I found a photograph. Me and Walter both grinning, covered in blue paint. His arm draped around my shoulder like I was the masterpiece. On the back, scrawled in his confident, looping hand, my legacy lives here. I sat back, overwhelmed. This wasn't just nostalgia. This was intentional. He had left pieces of the puzzle behind, hidden in places Nadine never thought to look. They deleted files, but they forgot to check the walls. Grandpa never trusted courts. That's why he left keys in closets. I hadn't slept. The cheap motel room smelled of bleach and damp carpet, and the heater clanked like it was exorcising something. But none of that mattered. My laptop sat open on the desk, its screen buzzing with the glow of scanned sketches, photos, and the letter Walter had addressed to Joanna Greer. The name pulsed in my mind like a code word from a past life. I had no idea who she was beyond that single page, and yet Walter had trusted her more than anyone in our family. That was saying something. I stared at the message I'd written. Ms. Greer, I believe this may concern you. Attached are documents from Walter Whitmore. I need to speak to you soon. Underneath, I'd attached the photo of the attic box, the scanned drawings signed R. Whitmore, and the sealed letter. The subject line was simple, Walter's clause. I hit send at 3:12 a.m. Then I waited. The motel light was flickering above the desk, casting long shadows across the clutter. Coffee-stained notepads, crumpled receipts, a highlighter I'd half-chewed to death. I didn't care. Every part of me was sharpened now, honed down to the single edge of pursuit. At 4:47 a.m., a reply arrived. One sentence. If that's real, they've already broken 4 laws. I stared at it for a long time. No greeting, no sign-off, just a statement clinical and lethal in its precision. I fired back more scans. Walter's handwriting, notarized signatures, even the back of the photo with his message scrawled in blue ink. I ended the email with a plea I hadn't intended to sound so raw. He meant for someone to find this. I'm not crazy. I just don't exist anymore. Less than 10 minutes later, a new message arrived. You're not crazy, and you do exist. Meet me. She gave a time and place neutral ground 2 towns over. Noon, tomorrow. The kind of daylight you use when you don't want shadows involved. That was when it hit me someone else was finally saying it out loud. That I wasn't insane. That something illegal had happened. And that meant there was a way to undo it. I closed my laptop and leaned back the plastic chair, groaning beneath me. The shift inside me wasn't loud, but it was permanent. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. A notification buzzed. An email from Camille. I opened it, half expecting some olive branch. It was 3 lines, sterile and cold. Rachel, I think it's best you stop digging into things you don't understand. Let the past be. I laughed out loud, bitter and hoarse. The past was the only place I did exist. Curious now, I dug deeper. I logged into a public registry site, cross-referencing deeds and property transfers, something I hadn't thought to do before. I searched by name, address, parcel number. And there it was. The studio. The one in Grandma's attic. Legally transferred in late 2021, from Walter to Camille. But 2021 was when I was still alive. Still Rachel Whitmore. Still breathing, walking, paying taxes. I pulled up the scanned copy of the contract. It listed Nadine as the witness, and the signature beside Camille's was pristine, dated 3 weeks before Walter's final hospital admission. I reread it twice. That meant they'd planned it. Not after his death. Not as a reaction, but before he'd even flatlined. Before the will reading, before the check. Before they'd erased me. They forged the transfer before I disappeared, which meant they planned the fire, before the funeral. Camille owned the studio, but she'd never stepped inside it. The elevator in Joanna Greer's building moved like it had something to prove, silent, polished, surgical. I caught my reflection in the mirror-paneled walls and barely recognized the woman looking back. Hollow-eyed hair tucked under a beanie, clutching a manila folder like it was a lifeline. Joanna's office was on the top floor. Not the flashy corner suite with a skyline view, but a quieter room tucked behind smoked glass and labeled only by initials JG. No frills, no flowers, just silence, discipline, and war-grade precision. The door opened before I knocked. Emery, her assistant, couldn't have been more than 25, dressed like a paralegal in mourning. He gave me a nod and stepped aside. Joanna sat behind a minimalist desk, reviewing documents with a red pen that might as well have been a scalpel. She looked up once, just once, then returned to her pages. "Sit." Her voice didn't ask. I obeyed. The meeting started like a deposition. She questioned everything: my memory, the timeline, the sources of each scan. She tested for cracks, for inconsistencies, and when she found none, she finally exhaled. "The deed's a forgery," she said, tapping the contract between Camille and Walter. "Dates inconsistent with his notarized calendar. See here, his signature slants right in every legitimate document. On this one, it curves left. That's tension. Forgers press too hard." I stared at the paper. "So it's fake. It's illegal," she corrected. "But proving it means finding motive, pattern, and replication." She gestured to Emery, who was already scanning documents through OCR software on a second monitor. He didn't speak, just typed with surgical calm. "Check this out," he murmured after a moment. "Bank account opened in 2022 under the name Ray Whitman. Same date Nadine filed the ownership change." I blinked. "Ray Whitman. Your name," Joanna said, slowly twisted. "Ray from Rachel. Whitman close enough to Whitmore. They didn't just erase you. They copied you." My mouth went dry. A shadow self. A legal phantom with my signature. My habits, probably even my voice, if Nadine had gone that far. Someone who could walk into a bank, transfer assets, sign over properties without being me. Joanna handed me a digital recorder. "Start taping everything. Every meeting, every call. They've committed at least 3 counts of fraud and 1 of identity fabrication. That's not negligence. That's strategy." I hit record. I looked around her office at the way every object seemed weighted, intentional. Law books framed statutes, one minimalist painting on the far wall, a single red slash down a canvas of black. No family photos. No distractions. Joanna was a different kind of ally. Not sentimental. Not warm. But unflinching. The kind of person you called when the house was already burning and you didn't want to save it, you wanted to expose who lit the match. She stood pulling a printout from the scanner. There's a third deed I want to cross-reference. If it matches the anomalies, we can prove conspiracy. I raised an eyebrow. Conspiracy 1, forgery, is a mistake. 2 is a strategy. 3 is a plan, she said. We start by proving intent. That's how we make them bleed legally. A slow foreign grin curled at the corners of my mouth. Not out of joy, out of recognition. For the first time, I wasn't the one being hunted. I was learning how to hunt back. I gathered my things recorder documents that cursed Studio Deed and stood. Emery held the door, and as I stepped into the hall, Joanna added one last instruction without looking up. Stay invisible, but act loud. I nodded. Because if I was never meant to be seen, then my revenge will be something they'll never unsee. The painting I saw online wasn't just mine, it was signed in a way only Walter and I understood. It was late. I sat in the motel room with the blinds pulled shut, the laptop screen casting an eerie glow across a table littered with receipts, coffee cups, and half-opened manila folders. Snow tapped against the windows like hesitant fingers. The heater coughed every few minutes but never warmed the air enough to matter. The title stopped me, cold, light beyond frost. The thumbnail image in the catalog was small, but I didn't need more. I knew the strokes, the layered whites and silvers that danced into gold in the center like hope, breaking through grief. It was a painting I'd made at 12 under Walter's guidance, a piece I never thought anyone else would see, let alone sell. But what stunned me most wasn't the image. It was the signature. Tucked into the lower left corner, almost imperceptible unless you knew to look, was the symbol Walter taught me to use. A sideways R merged into a backward W. Not a monogram, a mark of legacy. And now it was listed in an auction preview by Fairburn Gallery, one of the biggest modern art houses in Miami. The auction scheduled on December 23rd, 3 days before Walter's funeral. I picked up the phone and called Emery. I need you to verify a serial tag, I said. He didn't ask why, just typed as I read out the barcode from the auction PDF. He whistled low. That's a Whitmore Studio registration, category private archive, supposed to be locked inventory. It's not locked anymore. I crafted an email to the gallery as a fictitious collector from Seattle, Miss Reeve Harrison, interested in bidding and requesting provenance documents for verification. Within the hour, I received a reply from a man named Glenn Westford, a senior curator. Polite, enthusiastic, and completely unaware that I wasn't who I claimed to be. Dear Ms. Harrison, thank you for your interest in Light Beyond Frost. The painting was consigned anonymously, but we can share the chain of custody. It was submitted on December 10th by a C. Whitmore, who confirmed the piece came from the Whitmore Studio Archive. No artist listed, just the studio code. C. Whitmore. Camille. I reread the sentence 5 times, then called Emery again. She consigned it. She submitted it as anonymous, but she signed the consignment under her own name. Emery was silent for a moment. Then, do you want me to pull the tax records for that date? Yes. And anything about ownership declarations? My hands were shaking, but not from cold. This wasn't just theft. This was fraud layered over identity destruction. That painting was never Camille's to sell. She hadn't even known it existed until she saw the sketch in her wallet. Walter had kept it archived, it protected it. And now, somehow, it was being paraded for wealthy strangers to bid on, like it was nothing more than a pretty memory with a price tag. I scrolled through the PDF catalog. There it was again. Light Beyond Frost lot, Number 47, estimated at $14,000, $20, medium mixed oils on canvas, no date, no artist bio, just a coded reference and a mystery aura that probably thrilled collectors. But to me, it was proof. Proof they'd started dismantling me even before the check burned. They'd taken my name, my history, and now my art. I opened a new folder on my desktop, auction evidence. I saved the PDF, screenshotted the listing, archived the email chain, and started a timeline. She sold what she never owned, and now it's going public. They didn't hear me knock. I walked in with evidence instead. It was a Tuesday morning when Joanna and I stepped into the thick carpeted silence of Boulder City Hall. The air smelled faintly of copy toner and bureaucracy, but beneath it ran something hotter: tension, controlled, sharp, and ready to cut. Joanna carried the case file like a weapon, neatly bound, stamped, and legally lethal. I followed behind her, not as a shadow, not anymore, but as a storm in waiting. Every heel click on the marble was a beat in a quiet war drum. At the clerk's counter, we filed the motion temporary injunction on property transfer. Whitmore Studio. A woman in wire-rimmed glasses typed as Joanna read off the charges: forged deed, fraudulent identity transfer, suspected conspiracy to defraud estate value. My name, Rachel Whitmore, was back in ink. Not erased, not denied. It was the first time in weeks I felt real on paper. The notary looked up, brows slightly raised. You understand this will freeze the property immediately. Joanna smiled, measured and cold. That's the idea. Once filed, it began. An invisible line drawn between the Whitmores and me. A line they couldn't see yet, but it was about to wrap around their ankles. I left the building not triumphant, but sharpened. That night, we emailed Camille a formal notification the property was under investigation. Any attempts to sell, lease, or leverage the studio would be met with legal action. The email was not emotional. It was exact. A copy of the injunction was attached along with a note. This is no longer a private matter. 2 hours later, I received a delivery at the motel. A tube. Old, worn, taped along the seams with thick yellowing bands. No return address, just a note inside. For Rachel. Walter would have wanted you to have this. It was from Gerald Kincaid, Walter's oldest friend from the university art department. I hadn't seen him since I was 16. He must have seen the auction listing, recognized the style, put 2 and 2 together. Inside the tube, the original studio layout. Walter's blueprint. His signature in red ink marked changes he wanted before his death. There, circled in green, was the label Northern Wing Reserved, R. Whitmore Legacy Collection. He'd been planning something, preserving something, and they'd buried it. Joanna scanned the document, lips pursed. This is gold. We can compare this to the deed Camille submitted. If even a single layout element was altered or missing, they rewrote the map I finished. They didn't expect me to have the original. The next morning, we learned the email had landed. Camille opened it at 9:17 a.m. By 9:43, Ethan called her from out of state. Witnessed through shared office security footage, Joanna had eyes in places they didn't know about. He shouted. She didn't answer. She stared at the screen, silent. And then she called Nadine. We didn't know what she said. We didn't need to. They finally noticed. And that was exactly what I needed. Retaliation isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives by certified mail. Joanna sliced open the envelope with a silver letter opener, her movements careful and deliberate. I watched from the armrest of her office chair, stomach knotted. The blinds were drawn tight against the Colorado dusk, but the room felt colder than outside. Inside were 10 neatly bound pages from Ethan's attorney. Stamped, dated. Filed in the county office at exactly 4:38 p.m. Joanna read silently at first, then cursed under her breath. They're claiming your ownership is based on forged intent. That you manipulated Walter into transferring the rights out of guilt, not legality. They're accusing me of coercion. My voice cracked. Walter was... he was dying. Joanna laid the pages flat. They're not trying to prove anything. They're trying to throw enough mud to blur the glass. There was more. Attached were photocopies of what they claimed to be updated estate documents allegedly signed by Walter days before his death. In them, I was not only excluded again, but a statement was included saying my previous rights had been overextended without verification. I couldn't breathe. This is a lie, I whispered. Joanna nodded slowly. Yes, but a good one. My ears buzzed. My hands went numb. For a moment, it felt like the ground beneath me had given way, like I was falling backwards into the same oblivion they'd pushed me into at the will reading. They forged his signature, I asked. Possibly. Or altered a template close enough to bypass first-glance scrutiny. We'll need a specialist. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk. The silence roared. Joanna placed a hand over mine. If they bite this hard, Rachel, it means we hit a nerve. We're close. Don't lose the thread. But I had lost something. For a moment, I'd lost the rage that kept me going, until I opened the small side envelope that came with the package. Tucked inside was a supposed signed transfer order dated mid-2022, bearing Nadine's sweeping, regal signature. Except, I blinked. My eyes narrowed. I'd seen Nadine's signature before. Not from memory, but recently. I rose heart-pounding and ran to the box I'd kept from the motel, the one with the original shipping labels from the painting auction. In the back corner, folded under the customs document, was a gallery authentication form signed by Nadine in 2021, authorizing the studio's assets to be transferred for archival purposes. The two signatures didn't match. The slant of the N, the closed loop on the D, the tail on the E, too long, almost ornamental. I'd watched Walter teach Camille calligraphy once. He told her everyone has a signature rhythm. You can't fake rhythm. I snapped photos, printed both samples, laid them on Joanna's glass desk. Compare these. Joanna leaned over, expression darkening. That's not even close. Same name, different hand. They banked on no one looking this closely, I said. I sat back down slowly. The fear was still in me, but now braided with fury. Joanna nodded. We'll send this to a forensic analyst. But you've just found the thread that unravels the whole scarf. Outside lights flickered on in the windows of the buildings across the street. Camille hadn't responded. Not a single word. Not a denial. Not an explanation, which meant she was either complicit or cornered. They tried to bury me with paper. But they forgot I learned to draw from Walter. It was just a USB stick hidden behind a photo frame. But it held fire. I found it while rearranging my papers for the 100th time, trying to file one more exhibit, one more line of evidence, anything to outpace the suffocating silence of winter beating against the motel window. The photo frame was one I'd saved from the old house Walter and I covered in paint, both of us laughing like we'd invented color. Something rattled in the back when I moved it. The panel slid open with a click. It was barely the size of a pinky matte black taped with a faded strip of masking tape. On it, Walter's handwriting R. Play only when ready. My fingers trembled. I slid it into the port of my laptop. The screen flickered, then opened a folder labeled simply W Legacy. There were 2 files, 1 video, 1 PDF. I clicked the video. The recording wasn't polished. Walter sat in his old studio chair, daylight behind him, dust dancing in the air. He wore the wool cardigan I remembered from childhood, the one that always smelled like cedar and oil paint. His eyes were clear. If you're watching this, he began, then they tried to erase you. But you were never theirs to erase. I froze. Walter looked straight into the camera like he could still see me, like this wasn't just digital memory, but a lifeline thrown across time. I knew they'd come for it. The studio, the paintings, the money. Nadine always said legacy was about names. But you, Rachel, you understood it was about creation, about the unseen. He leaned forward, voice steady. I didn't put you in the main will because I didn't trust them. I left too many signs, and I knew they'd try to burn them all. That's why I had Joanna set up the alternate file. The one you've hopefully found by now. My hands were shaking. I hit pause. Opened the PDF. It was a scan of a physician's certificate. Dated November 28, 2023. Walter Whitmore found fully lucid, alert, and capable of complex reasoning. Fit to authorize legal documents. Signed by a Dr. Amelia Strauss, neurologist. I reopened the video. I signed the real documents the week after Thanksgiving, he continued. I wanted you to inherit more than money. I wanted you to inherit safety. I asked Joanna to hold them in reserve outside family reach just in case. He smiled faintly. If Nadine finds this, she'll call it treason. Ethan, he'll call it drama. Camille, well, I never knew what side she'd choose. But you, Rachel, you were always going to build something with what I left behind. The screen dimmed as the video ended. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I launched Zoom and called Joanna. She answered in her office, glasses low on her nose, legal pads stacked like ramparts beside her. I found something, I said. I shared my screen. She watched the full recording without speaking, then opened the PDF. She read every word twice. This is our ace, she said finally. This goes to court. She leaned in. They're not ready for this. Outside, snow plastered the window like static. Inside, the air shimmered with purpose. I stared at Walter's paused face on the screen. For the first time since Christmas, I felt like someone had turned the light back on inside me. Not the Rachel they'd buried in bureaucracy and lies. Not the daughter they'd erased from the books. Something else. It was time to be seen, not as their daughter, but as Walter's heir. When I entered the courtroom, no one looked at me. By the time I left, no one could look away. The courtroom in Boulder wasn't grand, just a modest wood-paneled chamber with recessed lights that cast too much shadow and not enough warmth. But it was packed. Not a single empty bench in the gallery. Journalists pressed to the back. Legal interns whispered to one another like they were watching the prelude to scandal. And there, in the front row, Nadine in navy wool, unmoved. Ethan in charcoal gray, smug and coiled. Camille pale under too much makeup, her hands twisting the chain of her purse. I walked in behind Joanna. My heels didn't echo, but they still made noise. Judge Halberd, known for his silence and intolerance of drama, adjusted his glasses and nodded to Joanna. We have reason to believe, Joanna began, that the plaintiff, Rachel Whitmore, was unlawfully stripped of legal identity through a coordinated act of estate manipulation. The opposing counsel objected. Your Honor, that's a bold and speculative accusation. Miss Whitmore has no standing. She does now, Joanna replied smoothly, and we have the documents to prove it. She slid the USB drive across the table like a chess piece. I didn't look at Nadine. Not yet. The judge plugged it into the courtroom monitor. There was no grand introduction. Just the still frame of Walter, his cardigan, the shadows behind him, the dust in the air. He looked very alive. Then he spoke. If you're watching this, they tried to erase you. But you were never theirs to erase. A rustle passed through the room. Joanna had timed it perfectly. Just as the court staff and judge were reeling from that opening, she handed over the signed physician's statement verifying Walter's full mental capacity. And this, she added, lifting the notarized studio blueprint, is the original floor plan marked by Walter and held outside the estate system. Circled R. Whitmore. Shino. The opposing counsel leaned forward. Even if authenticated, these documents prove nothing about legal ownership, And yet, Joanna said, pulling out the forged deed, this one signed with a mismatched signature dated when Rachel was still a legal citizen, suggests quite a bit. She held both side by side. Original, she said, nodding to the left. Forgery, nodding to the right. Your Honor, the contrast is artistic. That drew a few nervous chuckles. I watched Ethan shift uncomfortably. Nadine stared ahead, lips tight. Camille. Her hands had stilled. The judge cleared his throat. Miss Whitmore, he said. Do you have a statement? I stood. I was born Rachel Elaine Whitmore. In this city. In a hospital that now claims it never heard of me. My bank account was frozen. My name stripped from every system. My grandfather left behind documentation, physical, legal, and personal, that shows this was deliberate. I glanced at Ethan. He said I was never theirs to erase. And then I read the final line from Walter's video straight from the transcript. I trust only Rachel to guard what I built. Ethan scoffed loudly. Nadine whispered something sharp into her lawyer's ear. Camille looked at me, not in anger, but like someone watching ice crack beneath their own feet. The judge spoke. In light of the presented material, I'm authorizing an extended investigation into identity tampering and potential inheritance fraud. Miss Whitmore is henceforth recognized as a party with standing and probable cause to pursue full legal restoration. I didn't exhale. Not yet. I turned to leave, feeling their eyes burning into my back. They'd built a case to bury me, but now every word they said started digging their own grave. Camille came alone. No makeup. No mask. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, she still had the height, the posture, but something in her face had collapsed. Her eyes were raw red-rimmed like she hadn't slept since the hearing. Her hands clutched her coat like it might hide her from the room or from me. The gallery had been closed for months. A hushed, cavernous space off Pearl Street, long since emptied for renovation. One spotlight overhead flickered. The walls were bare but still carried faint outlines of where frames had once hung like memories not fully erased. Dust floated in the air like slow falling snow. She didn't say, "Hello?" "You came," I said. "I almost didn't," she replied. "But then I heard what Ethan said about you. And I couldn't." "Not anymore." I stayed still. "I didn't offer warmth. Not yet. I never wanted to hurt you," Rachel Camille said. "I didn't know what they were planning, not until it was too late." "But you signed things," I said, voice low. "Paintings, documents. You sold what wasn't yours." "I didn't know what I was signing at first." Her voice cracked. "They told me it was just paperwork to help with inventory, Walter's old work being archived. Nadine said it would protect the family name." I almost laughed. Protect the name that had already erased me. She knew I admired Walter, Camille whispered. He used to let me sit in the studio sometimes, watch him paint. He said I had a good eye. She used that. Said you were gone. That I was the only one who could help keep his legacy tidy. She took out a flash drive. Small, silver. No label. Her hands trembled as she held it out. "What's this, Ethan?" she said. He didn't know I was home. He didn't know my phone was in the room. I took it. She took a shaky breath. He told Nadine that cleaning the slate was the only way to protect their share, that if you didn't legally exist, no one could challenge the estate. He said they'd already burned half the records, that the rest would be taken care of. She stepped away from me. I recorded it. I didn't know what I'd do with it, but then I saw you in court. You didn't flinch. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The gallery's overhead light buzzed. The file was an audio recording. Rough, tinny, but unmistakable. Ethan's voice. "She doesn't exist," he said. Calm, crisp. "That's not erasing. That's cleaning the slate." Silence. A breath. Nadine's voice. "And if she tries to crawl back, we make sure the trail dies before she opens her mouth." The file ended. I stared at the screen frozen, then slowly looked at Camille. Why now, I asked. Why not months ago? Because I was afraid, she whispered. Because Nadine made me feel like it was either them or exile. Because I told myself you were strong, you'd find a way without me. She paused, voice splintering. But watching you walk into that courtroom, they all looked away, Rachel. Except you. I closed the laptop. You could testify, I said. She flinched. Not like that. Not in front of them. I can't. I stepped closer. You already gave me the fire. Sometimes that's enough. She turned to go, paused at the threshold. Camille, I said softly, this doesn't fix everything. She nodded. I know, but it's a start. She stepped into the dark. Camille whispered before she left, I can testify. But not in front of them. All empires look untouchable until they're touched by truth. The press room was electric. Microphones blinked red. Camera shutters snapped like teeth. The backdrop was a simple city seal, but the air around it pulsed with the scent of blood, reputational blood. Joanna stood beside me at the podium, a quiet fortress in a dark blazer. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. The paperwork did the talking, a sworn deposition, official transcripts, digital evidence, notarized timelines. Behind me on the monitor ran a slideshow, edited, concise, devastating. 1. A still of Walter's video. 2. A signature comparison of Nadine's forged documents. 3. A freeze frame of Ethan's voice print file sourced from Camille's USB. Effective today, Joanna began. The Boulder County Court has ruled that Ms. Rachel Whitmore's identity was unlawfully suppressed and altered through coordinated fraud. Gasps, questions, no answers yet. As such, she continued the estate clause originally deferred in Walter Whitmore's will concerning the studio, and all associated intellectual property has been reactivated. Ms. Whitmore is recognized as the sole primary beneficiary under Clause 17C. I stood there, arms still, spine straight, watching as the legacy they tried to burn flickered back to life, this time with names attached to the ashes. On-screen footage of the Whitmore corporate office, employees walking out with boxes, a brass nameplate being unscrewed from a door. A former PR manager giving a vague non-comment to the press. Nadine hadn't been seen since the court hearing. Rumors said she'd retreated to a private estate in Montana. Or maybe Europe. She was always good at disappearing. But Ethan couldn't hide. He stood in a different press room that same afternoon, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. His tie was crooked. His confidence had curdled into irritation. We categorically deny all allegations, one of the lawyers said. Mr. Whitmore's actions have been misrepresented flashbulbs, and the forged documents, a reporter asked. The mismatched signatures. The audio of him discussing erasing his sister. Out of context, Ethan snapped. That recording was edited. Is Camille Whitmore willing to confirm that silence? Because Camille had quietly submitted her testimony under seal. Not in front of them? No, but enough to turn the tide. I watched the clip of Ethan's face tightening as reporters shouted over one another. Joanna reached over and switched it off. That's enough humiliation for today, she said. But it wasn't about humiliation for me. It was about restoration. Outside, the headlines had already gone live. Whitmore family faces legal collapse amid fraud scandal. Daughter erased, Rachel Whitmore reclaims her name. Camille Whitmore's silent turn shakes defense. In the center of it all, I stayed still. The more noise they made, the more power I held in silence. Joanna looked at me, then handed over a thick envelope. Court date for formal heir declaration is set, she said. Studio, royalties, property. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't celebrating. This wasn't over. Not until the last ember died out. I stepped outside the building. Reporters swarmed. I said nothing. Just walk through them like smoke through open windows. The sky above Boulder was cloudless for the first time in weeks. They used fire to erase me. I used truth to burn them back. It was never about the money. It was always about who they said I could never be. The key clicked with an unfamiliar heaviness. It wasn't just metal, it was memory. The door creaked open like a held breath, and light spilled into the room as if it too had been waiting. Dust floated thick in the air. The smell of aged wood turpentine and thyme clung to everything. A layer of silence coated the studio like no one had dared disturb it since the day they closed the door behind Walter for the last time. I stood in the threshold a long moment, hand still on the doorknob. Emery's voice echoed behind me. It's all been processed. Title, property, copyrights. Everything's yours now. Fully restored. No caveats. He handed me a slim leather folio. The documents inside had more legal power than anything I could have imagined 6 months ago. But right now, they felt like a footnote to something bigger. Thank you, I said quietly. Emery offered a respectful nod, then stepped away, giving me the space I hadn't realized I needed. The workers Joanna had hired were still sweeping the front steps, patching up the weathered shingles, fixing the old skylight. But the room itself, the soul of it, was unchanged. The same easel stood in the far corner, tilted just slightly the way Walter used to leave it between strokes. The shelves still held half-used tubes of oil paint, stiff brushes, glass jars with labels so faded they were nearly ghosts. Near the window, folded under a piece of canvas, was the stool I used to sit on while he painted. And on the far table, half covered by a dusty cloth, was the portrait. The one I started when I was 10. It wasn't finished, never would be. The proportions were off the lines, too bold. But I remembered every brush stroke. I remembered how Walter told me not to erase them even when I wanted to. Mistakes, he'd said, are just the parts that haven't become meaning yet. I pulled the cloth off fully and let the light find the canvas again. It had waited like I had. There was a letter on the table. No envelope. Just thick paper folded once in Camille's handwriting. He was right about you. See. No apology. No justification. Just acknowledgement. And in its brevity, something more honest than anything she'd ever said aloud. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because there was something sacred about this quiet. Tears would have broken it. Instead, I walked toward the rear wall, bare, faded, marked by the outline of frames long taken down. From a case in the corner, I pulled out the painting they'd stolen. The one they'd tried to sell anonymously, scrubbed of name and meaning, light beyond frost. It looked different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. It no longer carried the ache of loss, but the weight of recovery. I mounted it beneath the window where the winter sun broke through the frosted glass, letting it flood the brush strokes. And underneath the canvas, I slid in a nameplate. New. Simple. Final. Rachel Whitmore, artist. Inheritor. Survivor. For the first time, the painting hung with its name intact. I stepped back and looked around the room. The walls would need repainting. The floor would creak under every step for a while. But this was mine. Not because a court said so, because it had always been mine. They said I was erased, but legacy is what you create, when no one's watching. They thought they burned 38 million. What they really burned was their place in my story. The snow fell the way it had a year ago, soft, thick, unspeaking. December 26th. The studio smelled of wood polish and fresh paint now. I had left the window cracked, letting in the scent of winter, and maybe a ghost or two. 12 months ago, I watched my name disappear in a fireplace. Today, it hung proudly across a plaque outside the studio door. Whitmore Studio, established 2024. There was no first name listed. It didn't need one anymore. I sat at the long wooden table, the same one Walter once used for oil palettes and sketches. My hands weren't trembling. They were warm, steady as they moved across the page of a letter I had drafted, one last document, not for court, not for vengeance. Dear Mr. Hanley, please process the transfer as discussed. The remaining balance of my unused trust, excluding funds designated for studio upkeep, is to be donated to the Mountain Arts Initiative for Underprivileged Youth. Consider it Walter's legacy. And mine, Rachel Whitmore. I signed it, folded it neatly, and sealed it in an envelope without a second thought. It wasn't a gesture. It was a decision. I looked up. The new painting sat on the easel. It wasn't finished yet, but it didn't have to be. The face stared forward, unblinking, not smiling, not sad. Me drawn as I was now. Older, not polished, but undeniable. A knock came at the door. I didn't answer. A moment later, I heard the soft thud of something slid through the letter slot. A box. Small matte black. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting in silver ink. For the record that couldn't be deleted, C. Inside was a matchbox, the same one Ethan used that night. I remembered the way the flame danced when he lit the edge of the check, how Nadine didn't flinch as the paper curled and turned black. But what lay inside now wasn't fire. It was its remains. A few delicate, crumbling flakes of ash sealed in a small glass vial. Camille must have collected them, why I would never know. Perhaps guilt. Perhaps ritual. Perhaps she wanted me to have a piece of what they thought they destroyed. I held the vial up to the light. The ash floated like something sacred suspended. With careful fingers, I unscrewed the top and poured the remnants into a shallow glass cup I had used for watercolors as a child. I set it on the windowsill of the studio where the light hit it around noon, the hour they burned the check 1 year ago, and I left it there. Not as a warning, not even as a tribute, but as proof that something burned can still leave shape in the air. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to understand. Some stories don't require a shared ending, only a reclaimed one. I turned back toward the painting. The studio was still quiet, utterly mine. This was never about what they took. It was about what I chose to take back. They tried to erase her with forged ink and cold fire, but what they ignited instead was her will to be seen. In the courtroom, in the studio, in the memory of those who thought she'd vanish, she stood taller than their silence ever hoped to bury. Justice, when pursued with clarity and courage, doesn't just restore the past, it rewrites the future. Like the final stroke on a long hidden canvas, the truth doesn't fade. It defines. If this story moved, you leave a like, share it, and comment below. Type 1 if you felt empowered, or 2 if you're still left wondering.